All right, hey folks, so today's video is going to be talking about how to effectively use exercise variety in your training to get bigger and stronger. But firstly, thanks for joining me on my channel. If you have any questions or comments about today, pop them down below. And if you'd like to work with me on your own strength and physique goals, there's a link in the description. Now, this topic was sparked on by a podcast that I was watching from Fuad Abiyad. So it was Fuad, Guy Sistanino, and a couple of other guys, and they were talking about someone's training program. I think it was like Matt Jansen or something like that. And they mentioned how he picks an exercise and he stays with it for a number of weeks to see progress. And pretty standard stuff, right? That's how you see progression. You pick an exercise, you stay with it, you keep going, and you get better at it. Now, Fuad and Guy found this to be just like mind-blowing stuff. And initially I thought to myself, okay, this is probably just the ramblings of genetic outliers. Like, they don't need to worry about this kind of stuff because they're just genetically gifted. Then I got to thinking about it a bit more, and I gave them the benefit of the doubt. And I think it's probably more a case of those guys will come round to the same exercise every now and again on a predetermined basis. And that's probably how they see progression. So let's say they do a hack squat as a main exercise for the legs the first week. Next week might be a leg press. The week after might be a pendulum squat, and then every now and again they'll come back to a hack squat and they'll try and beat what they did. I'm guessing that's kind of what it is. And just for the fact they progress so fast, they're able to just jump things up every now and again. So I thought back to, how did this apply to my own lifting career, and when have I done this in the past? And I thought it would be a good idea for a video, how to actually properly implement exercise variety and why it's useful. Because I think that's pretty standard, common practice for most bodybuilders, is not to do the same thing week in, week out, but to sort of rotate stuff on a fairly ad hoc, casual kind of basis. But I want to show you guys how I've systematized it twice in my career. All right, so firstly, let's look at why we do this. So yeah. So in terms of why we rotate exercises, is mostly to avoid burnout. Now, many years ago, I read a book called Science and Practice of Strength Training by, I think, Vladimir Zatsiorsky. This was way back when I was very obsessed with Westside Barbell, like 2005-ish or 2003. And I bought the book. So this was before YouTube. So it must have been 2003. So I bought the book and I got it imported from America. No copies available in the UK. I read it from front to cover, and it was all right. Like, I mean, it was very difficult to decipher. At a young age, I was only about, I don't know, however old I was, 21 or whatever then. It was quite hard to decipher what was being written in it. And I think I got more from the summaries on the internet. In any case, one of the main things that Zatsiorsky promoted was this idea of, to avoid burnout, there's two ways of dealing with things. You can either deload, as in a traditional linear periodization where you deload at the end and then you carry on, or you can just heavily rotate. And that was really the basis of conjugate training. You did massive rotations of exercises. So Westside Barbell were very famous for rotating things. And even the advanced lifters would come back to things every, I don't know, 6 months or whatever. But what Zatsiorsky recommended was working in 3-week waves. So rotations were heavily used, and we can apply that to hypertrophy training, and that's kind of what I'm talking about. So in terms of when to utilize this, so it's not necessary to do this immediately. I would caution against that. It's not something I would recommend people do straight away. So beginners and intermediates, or early stage intermediates, they would be better off just hitting the same exercise over and over and over again and getting stronger at them quicker. The reason being that most beginners and intermediates are probably going to be relatively young. So if you're relatively young, your joints are going to be relatively fresh. You can hit stuff over and over again, get better at the exercise, which is your primary goal. So make sure your form looks reasonably passable first, and then more practice means you get better quicker. Now, there are some caveats to that. If you're older and you're a beginner, your joints might not hold up to pounding the same thing over and over again. So you might want to start rotations earlier. So strength has a very heavy neural component, and getting stronger faster is usually going to be accomplished by just practicing the same movement over and over again. It's not dissimilar to trying to get better at, say, tennis or basketball. You just have to practice. Okay, so rotations are something which you can possibly leave a little bit later on in your training career. Now, how later on is going to depend on how quickly you advance and also how old you are, how much your joints hold up to wear and tear. But in general, in the beginning stages, practice, practice, practice. That's generally going to be better. All right. Now, in terms of what I did and how I implemented this. So I originally got into bodybuilding around about 2008, 2009-ish. So I heavily injured my hamstring in, I think 2006, coming back from a trip. I lived out in Asia for about a year and a half, and I came back to England. I hadn't trained for, I think, 6 months, because I spent the last 6 months of that 18 months traveling around Asia, like Korea, Japan, stuff like that. South Korea, of course, Japan and China. And so I came back, started training, and injured myself promptly. Very foolish mistake. I'll go into that another time. So anyway, I decided to give up powerlifting, and for a little while at least, and I got more into bodybuilding side of things. And I was taught how to do bodybuilding by a guy called Dr. Casey Butt from Canada. Really nice guy, really forthcoming with his advice. And he got me into training full body 3 to 4 times a week, utilizing a heavy, light, medium system. Now, that was the first time that I heavily used rotations. Prior to then, I had pretty much always done stuff on a weekly basis. So had a week routine, set things up, and just did things like that. At that stage, that's when I heavily got into full body, and I was rotating a heavy day, which was all the basic compound lifts, with a light day, which is all the isolation lifts for higher reps, shorter rest periods, then a medium day, which is somewhere in between, and then a further light day. That was kind of how I roughly did things, and I grew really well doing that. So that was when the first time I used rotations. Essentially, you can think of it like this. There was a heavy day, which was the majority of the stuff which you want to get better at. Then a light day, which was kind of really just active recovery. It didn't really add a great deal in terms of muscle building, but it was good active recovery for sandwiching between the heavy day and the medium day. Then the medium day, which was useful in its own right because there was a different variety of exercises. So to give you an example, for chest, easy to look at. Heavy day, I might do a bench press. Light day would be a dumbbell fly. Medium day would be a weighted dip. And then the next light day would be more dumbbell flies. That was kind of roughly how I did things. So I had a great deal of exercise variety across the course of the week. So that was the first time I used rotations early on. And it worked really well. Actually, those early bodybuilding days set me up to recover my hamstring and actually get back into powerlifting. Then I became my strongest, 2010, 2011-ish. Anyway, the next time that I used rotations was post-contest after my bodybuilding show in 2018. September 2018, I competed. And after that, I implemented a push-pull legs with 3 rotations. I felt at the time, because I was sort of, I'd been quite strong and I'd gotten a few injuries. The push-pull legs were a little bit easier to get into. The sessions were a bit easier to get into because, let's say, for example, it was a chest push session. Once I had warmed up with a press and I was really fully, warmed up and ready to go, I could pretty much run through the remainder of the chest exercises and the shoulder exercises and the tricep exercises nice and warmed up. So I felt better as an older lifter on the push-pull legs rather than a full body. But the rotations were still in place. So I still had 3 rotations. So I actually had 9 sessions at that stage. I had 3 push, 3 pull, 3 legs, and I would just rotate them over and over. At the time, I was actually training 6 days a week. So each lift came about every 10 days. It was actually quite frequent. So that's 2 times that I've used rotations. Now, it's really quite easy to implement them. You just take your current training program and you just duplicate it with similar but different exercises, and you just use it as a rotation. So with the full body, it was 4 full body days, so they were just rotated. With the push-pull legs, it was 3 push-pull leg rotations. So it's a very easy thing to implement. Just sit down on a spreadsheet, look at your training program, and then duplicate it with similar exercises. So I start things off with exercises per body part. So let's say you're trying to get stronger on the bench press. All right, so let's say your first variation is going to be the bench press. The next variation is going to be something that aids the bench press. So I would pick something like close grip bench press or a dumbbell bench press. In fact, there you go. There's 3 right there. So those are 3 which you can get stronger on over time and then continue to progress. Let's say we've got the overhead press. Okay, barbell overhead press. You could implement a seated shoulder press as well as a dumbbell press or a push press. So there you go. 3 variations there. And what should happen is, as you do all 3 variations, every session will add to your pressing strength or your chest pressing strength, and the sort of strength cycle will go round and round, and you should get stronger and stronger. And by the time you get round to the rotation on the first exercise, you're going to be stronger. And I always found that it was never a problem getting stronger with that approach. I was eating a lot of food. I was at a reasonable body fat percentage. I was mostly kind of recomping at that stage. But yeah, it works really, really well as you come into each session so fresh. So every time you do a session with a particular set of exercises, part of the recovery process is recovering your soft tissue, your ligaments. Muscles recover very, very rapidly. Like maybe for advanced lifters, I think we know that muscle recovers after like 24 hours, as quick as that or less than that. But what takes longer to recover is the ligaments and the soft tissue. So what these rotations allow you to do is to rotate damage to the soft tissue. So let's say you do a bench press. There are certain deformations that happen in your ligaments connecting your shoulders and your triceps, which you can get away with training again if you do something like the dumbbell bench press. So you can train the muscles hard and the ligaments still get trained, but the ligaments won't hold you back as much as if you did the barbell bench press again. And I think there's also a neural burnout part of it as well. So rotations work really, really well for getting around all that. The idea being, of course, that you end up not needing to deload. So if we have a look, all right, some next slide is concerns. So a bit of a caveat here. Now, you can typically get away with more volume and frequency. So you've got to be mindful of this. I think when I was doing the push-pull legs in 2018, I still was getting a couple of niggles in my knees and in my elbows. And part of that, I believe, was because I did the 6 days a week. And so I was coming around to everything every 10 days. In terms of sets per body part, at the time, I was hitting about 15 sets per week, which I think per body part, which I think was a little bit too much for me, considering how heavy I was going, because everything was done in a top set, back off set kind of approach. So it was a little bit too much. Had I done the same routine, but just spread out, say I was training only 4 days a week, and so I came around to the rotation every 2 weeks or so, that probably would have been a lot better. So be mindful of it. You can get away with a lot more volume and frequency with this and intensity with this approach, but you should approach every session 100% fresh and ready to PR. Sort of rid your mind of concerns about volume. Like, I've got to be doing X number of sets per week. Forget about that. If you're getting stronger, you're doing fine. Use volume as a lever for if you're progressing or not. Like, if you've got 3 rotations set up on a push-pull legs and you are progressing, great, your volume is fine. If you're not progressing and you're getting beat up, your volume's too high. If you're not progressing and you feel fresh, then your volume is probably too low. Think about that sort of approach, and I'll do a dedicated video on how to handle volume. But bear in mind, the goal is just to get brutally strong on all 3 sort of rotations. It's not to hit a predetermined number of sets per week just because of, science, right? So yeah, my sort of summary of this is it's a very, very good advanced technique. What should happen is over and over, you should hit PR after PR after PR. And then when you come back around to the first exercise, first rotation, you should be able to beat that because you're nice and fresh. This means you come into every single session fresh, fresh, fresh. Also, it means you minimize to eliminate the need for deloads. So yeah, second point there again is don't overly worry about volume. Pick the exercises you are suited to and your gym has availability of, and just get brutally strong on them. Like, I know now I have a set number of press variations and I have a goal in my mind about how strong I want to get in those, just sort of recovering some strength and whatnot that I've lost from, lockdown and stuff like that, to the goal of competing again next year. So stay fresh, get strong in a range of exercises, and decide for yourself that over the course of 6 months, you're going to get brutally strong on those lifts. You can do that with this technique and then you won't burn out. If you are a beginner to an intermediate, you can benefit from this. You might not need to, but you can certainly start to implement this early if you want to. Either way, it's not going to particularly harm your progress. It might just slow it down a little bit. Now, in terms of one final note on diet, when I was doing this both times, actually 2008 and 2018, and now I'm walking around a little bit heavier. from my recent cut. I'm walking around in the mornings now about 83 kilos as opposed to 80 when I ended the cut. So like, I notice it, you guys maybe don't, but my face is a little bit fatter. But I like to walk around at this body fat now. It's a little bit better for strength. It's a bit better for recompositioning. You've got enough calories coming in that you can fuel your sessions. You feel pretty good. So I do plenty of cardio every week, around about 3 hours of cardio per week alongside my lifting weights 4 days a week. And that's how I prefer to do things. If I was to maintain a leaner physique, it would just mean I wouldn't have as much energy and recovery to actually build strength, which is my primary goal right now. All right, folks, hopefully that video was useful. Great technique. You know, I've used it a number of times. I use it right now, and I'll be utilizing the rotations to ensure that I'm getting stronger and stronger without burning myself out. I think the push-pull legs for advanced lifters and older lifters is a good idea. Full body, if you're a little bit younger and your joints aren't quite as beat up, full body works great. And it's probably better long-term because it just means you're able to hit stuff more often and you're able to hit things when you're fresh. Push-pull legs, if you're a little bit older, you're a bit more beat up, is a nice alternative. But I'll leave it for you guys. Let me know what your thoughts are on that. And yeah, if you'd like to work with me on your own strength and physique goals, there's a link in the description. And I'll speak to you guys next time. Take it easy. Get strong.